Music. The arrival of the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz in Brazil was marked by a warm reception from the Brazilian Navy, in direct contrast to the policy adopted by the current Brazilian government, which is trying to distance itself from U.S. military actions. The gesture by the Brazilian Navy was not just a formality, it was also a clear message that the Navy does not intend to break its historical and strategic ties with the Americans, even in the face of internal political pressure. This move reinforces the idea that the Brazilian Navy follows its own logic of international cooperation, prioritizing the continuity of established alliances. By welcoming the American military with enthusiasm in Rio de Janeiro, the Brazilian Navy signaled that the partnership with the United States not only remains, but is likely to grow stronger. The friendship and cooperation between the two naval forces are seen as fundamental to facing common challenges, such as projecting regional power and combating organized crime along maritime routes. The result is a scenario of political tension, where the autonomy of the armed forces clashes with the diplomatic contradiction of the current Brazilian government. Welcome to Vida no Quartel. For decades, the Brazilian Navy has maintained a firm stance against any attempt at external interference that could compromise its long-term strategic plans. This tradition of autonomy is reflected in the continued historical ties with the United States Armed Forces, especially through joint exercises with the United States Navy and the Marines. Even in the face of internal political pressures, the Brazilian naval institution demonstrates that its priority is to strengthen its defense capabilities and maintain alliances it considers essential to face both external and internal threats. The reception of the USS Nimitz reinforces this line of action. By welcoming the American military personnel with courtesy and enthusiasm, the Navy signals that it does not intend to give up strategic partnerships that ensure access to technology, training, and international cooperation. This stance contrasts with the current government's attempt to reduce ties with the United States, showing that the Navy follows its own institutional objectives.
Brazil was, in the past, the second country in terms of shipbuilding. And today, I think it lacks political will and a long-term strategy that would ensure this position for the Brazilian state.
In addition, the arrival of the Nimitz in Brazil has a practical significance to strengthen the defense against criminal factions that use maritime routes for transnational trafficking. For the Navy, cooperation with the Americans is not just symbolic, but a concrete tool to face challenges that cross borders. In this way, the institution reaffirms its independence and its long-term strategic vision, even amid internal political disagreements. The attempt to politicize the military brought an immediate reaction within the Brazilian Navy. The cancellation of Operation Formosa in 2025, which traditionally took place in exclusive partnership with the United States, was interpreted as a sign of political interference in an area that should remain technical and strategic.
In the face of the crisis in bilateral relations between Brazil and the United States, the Pentagon over there and the Ministry of Defense here are making efforts to keep a low profile and avoid as much as possible political turbulence. But events that would bring together troops from both countries have already been canceled or postponed.
For most admirals, the decision not only compromised troop training, but also exposed the institution's vulnerability in the face of diplomatic disputes between governments. In this scenario, the Navy has adopted a more autonomous stance, seeking to preserve its operational capability and prevent political decisions from harming the use of its forces. This change in attitude reinforces the idea that, for the military, the continuity of strategic partnerships and the maintenance of troop readiness are priorities that cannot be subordinated to ideological clashes or disputes between national and international leaders. That's why the arrival of the USS Nimitz in Brazil has major political significance. The ship, considered one of the largest war machines ever built, carries with it not only military power but also decades of history in strategic operations around the world. From its participation in missions in the Middle East to deterrence exercises in the Pacific, the Nimitz has established itself as a symbol of the United States' global power projection. Its presence in Brazilian waters, on the eve of its retirement in 2027, is interpreted as a farewell gesture that reinforces Brazil's importance in the regional geopolitical landscape. Beyond the symbolism, the sharing of doctrine and technology during the Nimitz's stay directly benefits the Brazilian Navy. With limited resources to modernize its fleet, the opportunity to train side by side with one of the most advanced naval forces in the world represents a strategic gain. The exchange of experiences in logistics, carrier-based air operations, and combating maritime threats strengthens Brazil's ability to face both external enemies and criminal factions that use maritime routes for international trafficking. The message sent by the presence of the USS Nimitz is clear. The United States maintains its partnership policy with Brazil, and the Brazilian Navy demonstrates that it will continue to align with this strategy. This gesture paves the way for future joint actions against organized crime, especially at a time when the Southern Command is intensifying operations against vessels linked to trafficking in the Americas. For the Brazilian government, the message is uncomfortable, but for the military, it represents the reaffirmation of a historic friendship and a strategic vision that transcends internal political disputes. Leave your thoughts in the comments about the gesture by the Brazilian Navy and whether this move could have political causes that might harm the Navy. Here at Vida No Quartel, you stay up to date with everything happening in the military world. Leave your like, subscribe, and watch one of the videos appearing on your screen. Forward fighters, see you next time.